All right, it is 6:30. We're going to get going here real quickly. I'm going to have Amanda, the park board president, or open up the public meeting and kind of introduce the board.
Hi. All right. So the board members here are Jenny Opheim and Jerry Volk, and again myself, Amanda Olson. I'm the president. As you all know, we're here tonight to discuss Ashmoor, Glen, and putting a park over there and the options that are laid out. And More Engineering is going to go through a slideshow for you guys and present some ideas. And if you could just hold your questions till the end, we'll have an open house at the end.
All right, thank you. With that, as she had mentioned, it's a public input meeting for the Ashmoor Glen Neighborhood Park that the Park Board has been working on. Presenting tonight will be myself. I'm a project manager with More Engineering. Got 13 years of experience with More Engineering. I actually did work on the park up at Maple Point, and I'm also the city engineer, have been the city engineer for about 10 years now. And then with me is Anthony Sommerfeld. He's going to be he is the design engineer or project engineer. He has 5 years of experience with More, has worked on a lot of sites and park projects, so he has a lot of experience specific to parks. So with that, the overview, quickly touch on what the purpose of this meeting is going to cover. The scope and the schedule of where we're at right now, which is what we consider just the studies phase. We're trying to understand what the project's going to be and what it's going to cost. Go through some of the park amenities that the park board's looking at. Go through the conceptual park exhibits, which I think some of you have seen in the back already, which we'll have opportunity to look at those further. And then the conceptual costs and funding, potential project schedule, and then, as Amanda said, opening up for questions towards the end. We are recording this presentation, so the audio, if you're not speaking into this, the people who are going to watch this, say, later, won't be able to hear the question. So if you're okay coming up and asking a question, you can do that. Or if you're uncomfortable doing that, you want me to repeat the question, I can repeat the question. And then at the end, we're going to have an open house where we'll all be available. We're going to stay here for 30 minutes or however long it takes to just answer questions as you go around and have questions. I know some people it's difficult to ask a question in this format where it's a little bit easier when you're just kind of walking around looking at things. And you may have additional thoughts that come up that you want to ask. So the purpose of this public input meeting, to educate yourself, understand what's being talked about right now with the project. We want you to be informed, and ask questions. If there's things that you don't understand, this is a great opportunity to ask questions in addition to providing your feedback, because the goal here is to be moving towards the direction of a project that fits the needs of who's going to be using it, rather than the board just trying to decide what's going to happen with this project. So the goal is to get informed and ask questions and give them an idea of the direction of this project. And then there will be, there's an opportunity for a questionnaire. We've got a questionnaire up here. We'll hand it out towards the end of the project, or end of the presentation, that you can fill out. And it's got questions on there, circle, type questions, and then also an opportunity on the back to provide written feedback as well. And we'll be compiling all that information, trying to understand themes of the feedback, and then going through that with the board so that they can decide what the next step is, what's the direction that they're going to go. So the scope of the study phase, which we're in right now, we've already done an initial questionnaire that went out to everybody in the Ashmoor Glen development. It was, do you want a park? It was a very simple question. And then also, what type of amenities would you like to see? There's a whole list of different types of amenities in the park. And we looked at that as well. And then how comfortable were you with the cost, and what type of a size cost of a project would you be willing to or wanting to have in the neighborhood? Then we went through and we created the conceptual layouts based on that feedback. We've gone through that with the board. They've looked at different layouts, just ideas, and we've got a couple that Anthony will go through. Then holding this public input meeting as part of this phase. Then eventually when we go back, they're going to look at making any adjustments to it, and then we'll hold a public informational meeting where we say, this is what we're looking at doing now based on all the feedback. And then to finalize, we have to prepare a report that kind of summarizes everything and says, this is what we're looking at doing, and eventually it'll go to basically, it's considered a protest vote, but I'll get into a little bit more of that towards the end. But after that, this phase is done, we figure out what we want to do, what is it going to cost, then we move into design. So we're not even necessarily designing right now. We'll be bidding it and doing construction. So Anthony is going to go over the questionnaire results, just kind of a high level, and then as he moves into the concepts.
All right. So right now we're doing the study phase. No, sorry, forgot to flip the slide. So the initial questionnaire that we sent out to all the residents, we compiled that information. Of 89 surveys that we sent out to Ashmoor Glen, we received 49 back. So that was statistically a pretty good. Catching me there? So 49 responses back is actually pretty good, so we were happy with those numbers. So then from there we looked at all of the data from every question that was asked, and what we found was it was 23 no's and 26 yeses. One thing that this doesn't show is the 40 people who did not vote. Those were considered an indifferent, or they were okay, or they weren't against. So if you were to add those 40 in as an indifferent or a yes, this would look more like a 75% yes vote. So then the next thing we looked at was for the project was the amenities and the concepts from the survey results. We looked at adding a playground, a shade shelter, a hockey rink, the full-size basketball court that could be dual-purposed as a hockey rink in the winter, so that way it wasn't just a single-use facility, and then adding the typical site amenities that you'd see with the park between the lighting and the landscaping. So for the overall layout of the development, the park is situated currently in the middle of the development. The park currently owns this property. It's about a little under 2 acres for their current park size. So for the first exhibit that we looked at, we tried to create some connections between the two different roads, while we also offset the playground and basketball court inside of the park, which allowed if kids got out of the playground or a ball went loose, they weren't near a road. So that was the overall concept with the first option. The second option, this is just showing in the future if the park were to be expanded. This is just a conceptual look at if this park was expanded and what could be shown. As you can see on the first option, we kind of placed a baseball field. This is a t-ball field. You can see that it wouldn't fit in the current park, but if the park was expanded, there'd be ample green space. Not necessarily putting a t-ball facility there, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what the size of that green space would be for soccer or for football or different activities like that. So then the next option we looked at was option 2, and this was trying to go to more of your traditional rectangular parking lot off of one street versus off of 2. This we tried to leave ample park green space on the west side, and meanwhile keeping the same size playground, and this one is showing pickleball courts, whereas the first option showed basketball courts. The difference between the basketball court and the pickleball court is zero difference in footprint of the concrete or the footage that it would take up, but it's just showing that if you wanted to use it as pickleball courts versus a basketball court, you can do different types of things on it. Again, the overall concept would be to potentially make this into a hockey rink, so it would be used for 2 different uses during 2 different seasons. Option 2, again, the master plan or the expanded park would again do the same thing, open it up on the west side, showing that there would be more space for more green space in the future if they would ever want it. So the next thing we looked at was the different playground examples. We have these 3 different examples laid out on the back tables. These are just example playgrounds that we were provided by a supplier. All these playgrounds would be covered in the costs that we anticipated for this project. So we could put any of these playgrounds into the park and it would be within the budget that we've already kind of determined. So what the plan would be is not to actually pick one of these, but it would maybe be to combine the different features from different playgrounds to make one for Ashmoor Glen residents. The first one, what it shows is it's a 5 to 12 play structure. It has more of a tower structure, allowing, the way I kind of explained this was, think of like in McDonald's, the inside playground where you're able to climb from level to platform to platform. That's kind of what's happening in the tower component going up to the slides. So it just gives you a different feel. It's not your traditional playground. The Troy Park one is for 5 to 12 again. This is more of a traditional playground equipment. The additional feature to this would be a shade structure above it, which would provide a shade onto the playground equipment for the winter, or for the summer. So if it's a hot day, there would be some shades, so the equipment wouldn't be hot. And the last one is 2 structures actually on one playground site, and it would allow to have play features for ages 2 to 12. Whereas the other ones were 5 to 12. And it has various climbing features, but it also is more of your standard or typical playground. The shade structures that we looked for this project, the first 2 is a standard picnic shelter. The other one is a fabric shade structure. Those 2 both are in the same price range, and they are both included with the conceptual costs that we created for this project. The third option is the activity or warming house that we looked at, and this would be additional to what we already scoped for the project, but this would give the park the ability to do a warming house in the winter, do rentals on it for the summer, or have all-season bathrooms for the summer and winter. The athletic court that I've been kind of talking about with the 3 exhibits that we included, I kind of mentioned that we are proposing either pickleball or basketball court. We're showing here that on the top left is Detroit Lakes. They currently have a pickleball court that is flooded with hockey rink boards around it all year, and that's where the idea kind of came from. And so that's a photo of what that could look like. Again, that could look with a basketball court, and you would just put the boards on the inside during the winter. The second photo is an outdoor skating rink. That is the current system that we're looking at, is what the boards would look like potentially. Again, the materials haven't been picked, but that's just kind of what our costs reflect, is something similar to that type of product. And then the last one is just showing a summertime use with the boards up all year round, showing that it can be used for, they're showing hockey here, or again, we talked pickleboard or anything like that. So then I'm going to turn over to Brandon for the trails.
One of the amenities that was mentioned in the original questionnaire was just the ability to have trails. And so the city has been pretty active in trying to develop trails throughout anytime they get an opportunity. The first set of trails were really up by the railroad tracks that go up into Prairie View and then over to the west to Maple Point. And they added the trail along the east side of the highway. We've added a trail around the Meridian Grove development and then down First Street. Then we also added, and this is the 10-foot wide kind of concrete paths that you see through the Ashmoor Glen 3rd development. And so in the future, we would be looking to try to tie this stuff together. Obviously right now, 3rd edition, a little more difficult to get down here, but as this area develops, we would plan to tie this together. Down Sunset Drive, there really isn't a dedicated concrete path, but there is a striped lane, which is at that time what the development wanted to do. They eventually can be tying it back together here. So with that system, looking at trying to put something kind of through the park area. to kind of tie it all together. So the cost right now, and again, this is concept, looking for feedback. So right now, as it has been estimated, about $950,000. That has contingencies built into it. A lot of unknowns at this stage. We try to be conservative in those numbers. That over time, if things tweak or whatnot, as you get into design and actually bid it, that we are hopefully delivering the project for that price or less. How we come up with the estimated cost per lot is the full build out of Ashmoor Glen is estimated at about 179 lots, and so that's just the total project cost divided by the 179, which is about $5,300. Estimated cost per month would be estimated at $43, and that's based on doing it over 15 years at 5% interest. When we looked at the original questionnaire, these numbers here are reflective of everybody after we opened it up again. And so some of you may be aware, like we put out the questionnaire, we had a deadline on it, and then after that deadline passed, there was others that said, hey, can we get another opportunity to get more people to put in the questionnaire? And so this is the reflective of the late questionnaires that came in after the fact as well. This has a little bit more of a mix of answers between the different size projects. The initial questionnaire right off the bat was a little bit heavier towards kind of the upper tier. And so that's where we started out right now. Again, we're looking for feedback from everyone on the cost, and if it's something where cost looks good, and you want to give that feedback. If the cost looks too high, and you say, yeah, we got to eliminate amenities or reduce the cost somehow, that's what the park board's looking for. They want that feedback. So project funding, as of right now, what's been discussed with the park board is that this would be funded through a special assessment. They don't necessarily have a fund right now to pay for it out of pocket, and so it'd be specially assessed to the properties within the development. They are going to be looking at getting grant funds. The numbers that I provided before are assuming no grant funds, but we're at a stage right now where we're trying to determine what it is that you want to do with this park, and we have to get that figured out before we go after grant funds. We can't just say we want to get grant funds. We don't exactly know what we're doing. We want to have a really good plan of this is what we're planning to do. This is what we estimate the cost is, and we're going to try to request some grants. We're going to go after two different grants, North Dakota Parks and Rec, and then Outdoor Heritage Fund. And you can try to go after a higher percentage, but you end up ranking lower, and so it's kind of it's a balance of how much do you request, and then there's only so much funds available in some of these that if you ask too much, you might just get knocked out of the ranking because of that. So right now, the park board has talked about trying to get 20%. And if there's other grant opportunities that people are aware of, let us know. These are the ones that we've been looking at. So the project schedule, assuming that the park board kind of comes together with what the ideas are and starts to move forward after they get the feedback, we'd be looking at a study phase finishing up here really this fall in the next few months. And then later this fall, we're going to be trying to go after the grant funds. And then after that, we'd be moving into design and trying to bid the project and see where the prices are coming in at. And then summer sometime next year. If if things don't, the idea of what the park should look like, if that doesn't come to fruition here soon, it may move it back another year. As of right now, this would be kind of if everything kind of fell into place. So we want to make sure, as we've been working with the board, that we want a very good public involvement process. And so as of what has been done so far, the initial questionnaire that went out to ask. The initial idea is to give the park board the initial direction of where this park how it should look. They've reviewed that at park board meetings, which people can attend park board meetings. We're having the public input meeting right now, which again is we're just looking for feedback and input. The park board is going to take that input and we're going to try to update the drawings. And then eventually we're going to hold a public informational meeting, which will feel somewhat like this, but it's more of, you know, we've got all the input already. This is what they're proposing to do. And then it moves into what's called we call a protest period, where in order to do this project by special assessments, they have to put the project out to the public, the group that's going to be paying for it, which would be the whole development. And then those people are given an opportunity to write a written protest if they don't agree with the project. I always say, if you're going to write a written protest, explain why. It could be, I just don't want a park, or it could be, I think that it's too expensive. We need to, you know, give them enough direction, because if say it is protested out, they don't proceed with the concept that they developed, they may go back to the drawing board and try to put something together. And the hope is through the public input and the public information meeting that they put a project together that's agreeable by at least the majority of the people that are going to be benefiting from the project. So a lot of different opportunities, and obviously you can go to any of the park board meetings as well. So if the project moves forward, there's also a process for being involved in the special assessments. So once the project's got a little bit further along in construction, and you can kind of hone in on the actual project cost, the final project cost, which, you know, we build contingencies into it. Maybe it can come down if certain things, you know, issues don't come up during construction. But once they get the project cost figured out towards the end of construction, a special assessment commission meets, and some of you may have gone through that process with other projects through town, but you're given an opportunity to protest the cost that your property is being assessed as well, and be able to write a written protest in that. And then you can go in front of the commission to say, you know, either I don't agree with it because of this, and you can explain that, and then that commission takes that input and they could tweak it. It all depends on how they split this up. If it's split just a per equal property, it's pretty straightforward how they came up with it. Not sure if they're going to do it any differently than that, but that's, I think, the initial thoughts. So as right now, questions, and I just, before I go into questions, Anthony had made a statement at the beginning about the responses. Obviously heard people that, you know, didn't agree with that statement. The thought on that is not necessarily that they're yeses, it's that most of the time people who do not respond are impartial to it. Typically, not saying they're all, but typically. So I wanted to just clarify that it was probably stated wrong, that we didn't say, you know, we don't want to say that there was 75% that said yes. That's not the intent. It's understanding, you know, what is typical. And when you go into a protest process, say if the project moves forward, the only ones that they take into account, and this is the legal process, are the people who are against it. So you do a protest vote, and that's the only ones that they look at. There's no process for I'm for it. It's only I'm against it. And the reason why they do that in, you know, a century code and whatnot is like public improvements. A lot of times it's just the people who don't want it that, you know, will typically speak up. More common. You probably wouldn't get a lot of projects done at all if it was always like a yes/no vote. And so to clarify that, that's not what we intended to say, I guess. But you kind of understand the concept that we're going through there. So with that, yep, we'll open up for questions.